Well, good afternoon. It's good to see you. Jackie, thank you for doing the survey before I spoke. I really appreciate that. And I know you've all been sitting here very long. I've been here with you. And so don't worry, this will be short. It shouldn't go anything over 3 hours today. But as Jackie said, my name is Dill. I'm a professor at Biola University. I'm a teacher at a local high school as well as a pastor of Union Church in San Clemente. And so I have to be honest, being here, especially being one of the, I think the only keynote male speaker, I feel you may be familiar with the story in the Bible of Daniel in the lion's den. I somewhat feel like Dana in the lioness den this afternoon. And as lions, it's because you're strong and you're intelligent and a little bit intimidating. But some of you with that may be wondering why I am here. I as you may be aware, am not a woman. And also, I don't work in electronics. However, to give you a little bit of credentials to assuage your fear, I do live with 4 women. Just to introduce them really quickly, this is my wife of 14 years. She's my high school sweetheart. She's in the back. She hates that I have a picture of her up here because she thinks every picture she's ever taken is terrible, which I, on the opposite, think every picture she's ever taken is wonderful. It's a tension in our marriage. But God has blessed me with a little bit of humor as well. My wife and I'm in the middle of 3 very boyish boys, and he gave me 3 beautiful daughters. And so this is Daisy, Penny, and my youngest, Lottie Jo. They're 9, 7, and 5. And it's not even these 4 women, but even our dog is a girl. But we do have a cat, and his name is Bob. And so, now, I live with these beautiful women, but also I do, not to brag, have a little bit of business consulting experience. In fact, I booked my first client this year, and I've been working closely with her. She's been starting a startup company in our local neighborhood. Daisy is quite the entrepreneur. But even if my impressive credentials don't sway you to listen to me this afternoon, rest assured, the topic that I'm speaking about is relevant for all men and all women. But before I tell you what the topic is, I'd like to tell you 3 stories. This is John. John is middle management in a large corporation, and having gone through the rookie phase of his career, he's now a seasoned employee. He has aspirations for promotion where he'd enjoy all the benefits, better pay, more power, corner office, and the respect of someone who's made it. He likes where he's at now, but he's excited to do the hard work required to get ahead. This is Mackenzie. Mackenzie is an artist that works at a local coffee shop. She does a side gig doing deliveries for Amazon, but truthfully, after paying rent, she's basically broke. She's an artist. However, she's okay with it. She'd love to have more financial stability, maybe even a 5-year plan, but not if it gets in the way of her art. As it is, being broke and aimless is fine with her as long as she's the freedom to paint. And this is Joe. Joe is a common criminal. Pickpocketing is his specialty. It pays the bills quite well, but he isn't against more serious crimes if it made sense for him. Right now, he's working with a team that's ready to scam somebody out of their life savings. He's nervous, but he's taking the risk for the promised reward. Now, as you see these 3 people, I'm going to give you just about 20 seconds, 30 seconds to talk amongst yourselves. Though very different, what is one thing they all have in common? Bob, Mackenzie, and Joe live very different lives. They're doing very different things, but they've one thing in common. They all want to be happy. They all want to be happy. You know, when I think about that, we do have that common pursuit in common together, don't we? It makes me think about, Carla spoke earlier of critical thinking, and one hero of critical thought of mine is a man named Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher. You may have heard about him. He was the tutor of Alexander the Great, who took over the world. Fairly nice credentials. But he said this: every action that a human does, in every pursuit, we aim at some good. You never do something for no reason. And if you ratchet it up, I eat so that I can be full. I drive so I can get to work. There's always these sub-aims that we have. But if we think about it, every sub-aim we have is ultimately always going toward one king aim that our whole life is working toward. And Aristotle went one step further, and he said this: "Now such a thing is happiness. Above all else, for we always choose happiness for self and never for the sake of something else." Aristotle was onto something. He says there's all sorts of things we pursue so that we get something else because of it. But it's not true of happiness, is it? You seek happiness. I seek happiness for the sake of having happiness. There's no other greater aim that we have. So if we think about why do women work in business and electronics, the answer, ultimately, happiness. Why does the student study? Happiness. Why does the father protect his family? Happiness. And also, why does the thief steal and the murderer murder? The answer is still happiness. They think even by doing those wrong things, it will bring them some kind of end that will make them happy. Everyone, everywhere, including everyone in this room, is always seeking and working for happiness. Which then begs this question to be asked: how are we doing? How are we doing with our experience of happiness? Now, if you're like me and you've read various things, the answer may not be what you think, because especially as we think about that question, there is often some initial optimism that we have when we think about, are we happy as a people? I mean, think about the day and age that we live right now. Presently, we live in one of the most developed countries in the world with a great economy, relatively speaking, affluence, freedom more than most. Historically, we live in an era with the best technology, best medical care, access to knowledge, living conditions, luxuries. The past extravagances of the rich are the most basic conveniences for even the most poor among us. If we measure goodness by life expectancy, wealth, and decreasing poverty, the 21st century is objectively the best time to be alive. But there's a sobering reality. It seems happiness, with as much as we have, opportunities, possessions, technology, it seems like happiness is slipping out of the grip of our culture. 29% of adults are diagnosed with clinical depression, and that's a 10% increase since 2015. 17.8% more people are now being treated for depression, which is a 7% increase since 2015. Both of those rates are the highest recorded by Gallup since it began measuring depression. Even more, 36.7% is 1/3 of women now report having been diagnosed with depression at some point in their lifetime. So my question is this: if now is objectively the best time to be alive, why are so many people miserable? It's worth asking, isn't it? Now, to consider, I don't want to just be a downer, especially as the last speaker. So I have an answer, hopefully to at least help you on your own journey of pursuing happiness. And I'd like to seek to answer the question, how can we truly be happy, by looking at 3 considerations. And the first that I'd like us to consider is the things that we often chase, hoping they're going to make us happy. Because it all seems like we're on a wild goose chase, but there's not an actual goose that exists. We're doing a lot of labor and effort, sacrifice and time, and the thing we're hoping brings us happiness doesn't seem to always hash out like it promises. So what are the common gooses that we tend to chase, thinking this is what will bring us happiness? Now, as a teacher, I sometimes have the unfortunate experience of having students cheat on tests and copy each other's homework. And as I look around culture, it all somewhat seems like we've all copied off of the same student's homework, because when we're trying to be happy, we seem to use the same formula. What's the formula that we all use? If I just have, fill in the blank, then what? Then I'll be happy. Now, what we fill in that blank will vary from person to person, but it seems like we all have that same formula in mind. So here's 4 of the most popular gooses we chase in hopes that they'll bring us happiness. And the first one you likely are anticipating. If I just have more money, I'll be happy. There's a student in my class one time that bravely asked this question that maybe you've asked in your mind, if not with your mouth. He said, I know everyone says money doesn't buy happiness, Mr. Dill, but to be honest, if I had $1 billion, I think I'd be fairly happy. You have to love that honesty. And in a sense, there's some truth to it, because can you really be happy by any measurable degree if you don't have enough money to feed yourself, to clothe yourself? For basic necessities, money is an important contributor to happiness. But research indicates that the more money you have does not cause more happiness in your life. The University of Virginia, after studying the emotional well-being of thousands of people from low to high incomes, concluded this: beyond a household income of $75,000 a year, basic needs, money does nothing for happiness, enjoyment, sadness, or stress. You see, more money in the bank does not mean more happiness in your heart. More money can get you more toys, but it doesn't guarantee joy. And this is actually wisdom that's not just showing up in studies today, but even if you look at something like in the Old Testament scriptures, King Solomon in Ecclesiastes wrote this: the sleep of a laborer is sweet. A laborer being like the intern in the company. He sleeps soundly, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. Have you ever noticed how well college kids sleep? An 8 o'clock class is like a punishment for them. Why do they sleep so well? Because they're broke. They have no assets or possessions to worry about. The second goose that we chase is, if I just have better experiences, then I'll be happy. You may say, I know the money thing doesn't work, but I saw Eat, Pray, and Love. I saw Julia Roberts seek greater experiences like traveling, vacationing, or maybe taking a Duffy boat to a fantastic dinner. Shout out to my Duffy boat, ladies. You see, it's not the destination, but it's the journey. I had a professor, and he's now my colleague, but he had this great concept. He says, are you living a parenthetical life? You see, parentheses in a sentence, it's not really a part of the main sentence, right? It's kind of like this add-on. You could take parentheses out and the sentence continues on. And he was urging college students, he says, oftentimes you treat Monday through Friday like it's a parentheses, and real life is had when? On the weekends. But he urged us, think about how miserable you're going to be, because 5 out of 7 of the days, every single week, you're just grinding it out, waiting for those 2 days where true life is happening. If you are searching after better experiences to bring you happiness, you are dooming yourself to parenthetical living. The real life that you're seeking to live will be the 5% of those extravagant vacations or meaningful experiences, and the 95% of the ordinary grind will be miserable time, only fulfilling because you're waiting for that future experience to come. But good experiences are all killed by the same villain. Do you know what his name is? Monday. Monday. A vacation is nice until you're back at work Monday morning. Even worse, work on Monday is even more miserable than it was before, when happiness doesn't exist in the normal experience now, but the extraordinary experience later. You see, friends, check this out. At best, experiences leave us fond memories of the past, but they don't help us better enjoy the present or live better in the future. Good memories do not make a good life. There's more. If I just had greater success, then I would be happy. You see, a good career is a good thing, and you should seek to grow and enrich your career. However, have you ever considered careers are not permanent, and they're not unlimited? If your whole life is poured into a career, what happens to your happiness if you get demoted or laid off or fired, or if work isn't perfect? Then your happiness won't be either. The Economic Institute of America gave an interesting statistic about what often happens for those who retire. They said this: retirement increases the probability of suffering from clinical depression of about 40%. Cambridge University had a similar study where they found that retirees are more prone to depression, anxiety, and even physical health decline, including increasing chances of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. Now, there's lots of reasons that those could be happening, but could it be that these are people who've made their entire life about what? Career success. And the moment they finally put their career to an end, they look around and they no longer find any reason to be happy. You see, seeking happiness from work seems to be a sure way to never get it. There's got to be something more. And the last is this. Some of you may be thinking, money, experiences, success, and you take a higher road and you say, no, my life is going to revolve around finding happiness from the legacy that I'm going to lead. It's the most honorable of these all. It's not a superficial thing like a paycheck or a promotion, but it's about prestige, being remembered well. But can I encourage you to think about some of the greatest heroes our society remembers in the history books? People like Abraham Lincoln and Sarah Barton and Martin Luther King Jr. And think about how once-in-a-lifetime kind of people they are. They're not even just goats, greatest of all time. They're unicorns, right? They're absolute people that are remembered because they did something that billions and billions of people did not do. The likeliness of anyone in this room being remembered like those people is very small. But take it closer to home. Raise your hand if you know the name of your paternal grandfather. Raise your hand. I'm hoping all hands are raised. Now keep your hand up if you know the name of your paternal great-great-grandfather. Keep your hand up if you know the name of your paternal great-great-grandfather. Okay, we have one in the back. Someone studied their family tree. But as I go further, what happens to our memory? It fades. Isn't it curious that the people we should be most well studied about, most prepared to remember, who've impacted our lives and the lives of those in our own family, we have a difficult time, if at all, remembering even their names? Again, to quote King Solomon, he says this, For as of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. See that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. In this way, the wise dies just like the fool. How can leaving a legacy make us happy if even our own families, let alone everyone else in the world, will likely forget our names, let alone our lives and our accomplishments? Is that a happy, sustaining thought? So as we look at these popular gooses we chase, you may be thinking, yeah, but you're just saying that because you're like a school teacher and stuff, and you don't really have the money or maybe the experience, and so that's why you're saying this. You're just dogging on it because you don't have it. I don't know if you look at Yelp often before you go to a restaurant. Yes, it's the only way I'll go to a restaurant. If it's 4 stars and above, I'm good. If it gets a little bit below that, it's a little janky. Okay? So let's look at the Yelp reviews of not just one or two that had one or two of these things, but let's look at how people have reviewed these when they've had all of these things in great amounts. This first face you may know. He was actually spoken about by Colin earlier today. Tom Brady, you know he's successful. Look at the jacket he's wearing. Okay, that's just success. This was from a 60 Minutes interview that he had done years ago. At this point, he only had 3 Super Bowl rings. Now he has 7. But he said this, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. And me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. What else is there for me? That's not a raving Yelp review. Or how about this? And as this man grows, he seems to not be growing in wisdom, but he seems to actually be growing in the likeness of Aristotle himself. Jim Carrey, very successful and famous. He has all those gooses. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer. I can't help but think of that old Rolling Stones songs. I can't get no satisfaction. Da, 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 da. And then I love how that chorus ends. I can't get no satisfaction because I try and I try and I try, and I can't get no satisfaction. Us preachers have this line that we like to use a lot. It's the definition of insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Is unhappiness, therefore, unattainable? Should we just close up shop? I don't think so. And I think what's happening is that we're looking at happiness in the wrong way, which leads us to the second consideration, and it's our goof. The error that many of us make in our pursuit, our common pursuit of happiness. You see, wanting happiness is not the problem, because what kind of psychopath would want to be miserable? Right? That's not going to be the takeaway of my talk. Our problem is not that we want happiness, but we're misidentifying what it is. You see, let me explain it this way. In life, there are first things and there are second things. There are causes and there are effects. There are roots that give way to fruits. And in life, if you're going to be successful and accomplished, it is incredibly important to make a clean distinction of those two things, isn't it? For instance, to give you a couple examples, if I have work, then I'll get money. Okay? And this is actually a real-life shot of my savings account. Again, I'm a teacher, so this is my whole life savings. If I have health, then I'll find comfort. If I have an Android phone, then no one will invite me to their group chats. Okay? Life consists of first things that give way to second things. You see, now, let me explain it. If you get sick and say you now have the chills, you're cold, there's two ways that you can approach finding warmth. One is you can get blankets, you can turn up the thermostat, you can sit close to a fire, and as long as you have those specific items, you'll experience temporary warmth. A second way of dealing with your problem is not by seeking warmth, but by seeking what? Health. If I get health, then what does my body naturally give me? The warmth that I desire. But if I seek warmth, then I'll have it as long as I have those external things. But the moment they're taken away, my warmth goes with it. C.S. Lewis, the writer of the Narnia series, he was a Cambridge philosopher and theologian. He said it this way: put first things first, and then we get the second things thrown in. But if we put second things first, we lose both the first and the second things. So if I look back at our chart here, what he's saying is if we get these, the first things, health and work, then what will come along with that are these things. However, if I chase after the second things, I make money my pursuit, I make comfort my pursuit, then what will I lose? Health and work. And then also what will I lose? Money and health. If you put first things first, second things get thrown in, but if you put second things first, then we lose both the first and the second things. And this isn't just C.S. Lewis, and this isn't just Dana Dill, but this is actually a piece of wisdom that those that have gone before us for thousands of years have actually noted. To give you a couple examples, the man on the left is named Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called The Meaning of Life. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was in the concentration camps, and he wrote in his book about his experiences, but he was a man of profound happiness, even though he went through the grueling circumstances he went through. And he said this: don't aim at happiness. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Colin up here earlier spoke about he looking for employees. What drives you? That's an important question, isn't it? Now, if you had an employee say, well, money drives me, praise drives me, you likely wouldn't hire that person. But if that person gave an answer where they were living for something much greater than themselves and that was their driving factor, that would be a much better candidate for that position, because you know this person will be far more stable than someone who pursues a second thing over a first thing. Eleanor Roosevelt said, Happiness is not a goal. It is the byproduct of a life well lived. And for my animal lovers, William Bennett said, happiness is like a cat. If you try to coax or call it, it will avoid you. It will never come. But if you pay no attention to it and go about your business, you'll find it rubbing up against your legs and jumping into your lap. You see, here's where we are right now in this talk. We all want to be happy, yes? We all want to be happy. But happiness can't be found by directly seeking happiness. You get it? Okay, let's pray. No, I'm just kidding. So what do we do with this conundrum? We've established the emptiness of the gooses we often pursue and the mistake of seeing happiness as a first thing instead of a second thing that comes from a first thing. So the final question is, so what do we do about this? Now, at this point, some of you may be expecting me to say something like, here's all the stuff you need to get rid of, right? You've seen the minimalism documentary on Netflix, and you're like, he's going to do it to us. He's going to say, get rid of all the stuff. I'm not going to say that. But also, I'm not going to say, here's the things that you need to acquire. Because if it was about us getting rid of stuff or acquiring stuff, that would be somewhat of a hopeless situation because those are incredibly difficult things to achieve. Something you need to get rid of or something that you need to obtain. But the answer may not be in relinquishing something or receiving something you don't have, but what if it's possibly about reordering the things that are already in front of you? Putting the things that you already have in the proper order. Which leads us to the last consideration that we have, which is our good. We've looked at the gooses that we chase, we looked at the goof that we make, making a second thing a first thing. So now we have to ask, what is the first thing that we should be pursuing so we all get the desirable second thing of happiness that ensues from it? And the answer is simple, but it's profound. Our good, friends, is living like a human, fully alive. Our good, the aim that we should all take upon ourselves, is to not make the most money we can, not climb the ladder the highest we can go, but it should be in us fully being what we are. Because if we are what we are made to be, then most likely in that, we'll experience what is a byproduct? Happiness. So let me give you a thought experiment. Where would a fish be most happy? In the water. How about a worm? In the mud. How about a bird? Okay, it did not take you long to confidently answer those questions because all of us, I think, do believe this one principle. Creatures are most happy when they're living how they're made to live. If you have any creature live against its nature, it's going to have unhappiness as a surefire result. There's this group of philosophers in the first century called the Stoics. Now, they have a bad rap because if you know someone who's Stoic, they just look like this all the time. That's actually the opposite of Stoic wisdom. Stoic wisdom was pursuing to have a life abundant with joy, even though the most radically horrendous things or tragic circumstances could happen. They sought to have joy even in those situations. To be Stoic is to be ready to embrace whatever life throws at you and still have your joy intact. And the Stoics often would say this: happiness comes when we live according to our nature. Now, this is somewhat countercultural because our culture today, if you were to ask, what is freedom? They'll likely give an answer like this: freedom is being able to do whatever you want without restriction. Whatever seems good, you can do it without restriction. Whatever feels good, do it without restriction. However, if you're like me, have you ever had ideas that you thought were right, but in the end weren't? Has that happened to anybody in here? How about this? Have you ever had desires that you thank God you did not seek to fulfill? So if our ideas and our desires are often erring, then maybe a life of freedom isn't found in doing what I think best or doing what I want the most, but again, found in living like I was intended or created to live. Now think about with a society with a definition of freedom like that. Again, I call you to remember the statistics that I read at the beginning of this talk. It doesn't seem that that idea of freedom, doing what you think, what seems best to you or what you want the most, it doesn't seem like that's leading to a greater flourishing life. Suppose if a fish, you could talk to your goldfish and you say, and the fish says, I want to be free. And you say, okay, what do you want to do? And the fish said, I want to live on the land. Well, if you loved your goldfish, would you fulfill its desire? Even though it wants to live outside of the water, you would say no, because though you may want that, it will not bring you greater freedom and joy because it goes against your nature. A fish is happiest in the water, and a human is happiest when they're living like they're made to live. So if we want happiness, then we should be hesitant to follow our stomach, cultural fads, our best guesses of what's good, but instead seek and make it our life goal to live skillfully as a human, fully alive. So what does it mean to live like a human? Is that the question that we have to ask now? What does it mean to live like a human, fully alive? Now, this is a question that I, especially as a professor and a huge student of philosophy and theology, the answer to this question demands long discussion and careful thinking. But I do think that we can still get somewhere by asking at least this one question. What makes humans unique from every other creature on this planet? Because if we can identify the things that are unique to humans alone, then maybe we're on track in finding out what it means to be a human fully alive. So what are the things that make humans unique above the rest of all creation? Now there's, I think, lots of answers to this, but there's three that I'd like to bring our attention to this afternoon. The first way that we are unique from everything else in this world is that we are moral. We're moral. We have a sense of right and wrong. We have vocabulary of good and evil. We understand concepts like justice and virtue and vice. It doesn't matter how much planet Earth you watch, there's no other creature in the world that has a deep and abiding sense of morality. It's not just something we make up, it's something that makes us up. It's not just something written out there made up by some society, it's something that for all of us is written deeply within our hearts. Have you ever thought about how weird our parenting is compared to all the other animals in the world? You see, in the same way of other animals, we do a lot of the same things for our young, don't we? We seek to feed them and protect them and care for them, but we do something that no other creatures do. We strive and sacrifice to make our kids what? Moral. You see, it pains us, and if you're a parent, you know this. It pains us deeply when our children lie, when they steal, or when they act greedy or hurt other kids. It deeply pleases us when they do what? Speak truly, when they show courage, when they act justly and selflessly for others. And so we work hard to raise our kids to not only be alive people, but to be good people, don't we? Now why? Because again, we know in our heart that there is a right and a wrong, and we know that good morality does not just keep our kids out of jail, which is a benefit, but that good morality is also the necessary pathway to a happy life. We intuitively know that happiness cannot be had by a malformed, immoral person. There's a philosopher that once told this story about his daughter who she wanted to go to a party on the weekend, and he said no. And she, as the teenager, gave the popular refrain, "Why don't you want me to be happy? You're stealing my happiness." And now he's a philosophy professor, and so you don't ask philosophy professors questions because they're going to give you answers. And he said this, "My love, You are too young to be happy. You first need to learn how to be good. You see, he rightly identified that happiness is not a thing to have, but it's a thing that what? Comes from being a human fully alive. Now, I think we, again, intuitively know this. Think about, let's kick the tires of this idea. We know that good character blesses us, don't we? Like, thought experiment. Let's imagine a person who is full of virtue and good character. They're honest, they're selfless, they're generous, they're kind, they're compassionate, they're just, they're patient, they're grateful, and they're loving. Let's say that's the character of their soul. Put that person in a wealthy circumstance. Are they happy? Yeah. Which is hard to be happy and wealthy at the same time. Now put that person in a poor circumstance. They don't have as much money. They don't have all the nice things. Are they happy? Yes. Because we understand that if you're a person of patience and kindness and compassion, diligence, hard work, honesty, no matter where you put that kind of person, they're going to thrive in whatever soil they're planted. On the flip side, imagine someone of not a virtuous character, but a vicious character, someone who's greedy, impatient, selfish, cruel, and dishonest. It doesn't matter if that person is healthy or wealthy, or if they are poor and sore, no matter the treasures or trinkets they have, they will likely be unhappy in whatever situation they're in. Because good character tends to bless the person who possesses it, no matter their circumstance. Another way of looking at it is think about this. Think about how good character blesses the people we love the most in our life. Consider how important trust is in a good work and family relationships. Trust is fairly important. Bosses, you want your employees to trust you. It's hard to function well if there's no trust. Employees, you want your bosses to trust you because it's hard for you to do your job if they don't extend to you trust. Now, you may have seen me in the previous talks today walking around the back. It wasn't because I was bored or I didn't think the people up here had anything to say. In fact, I was listening intently. I had broken a rib a week and a half ago, and it's really difficult for me to sit down. But just to prove to you I was listening, Colin earlier today, who not only says things beautifully, I mean, you got to love the accent, right? Colin, you could read out of the yellow pages and my life will be changed. So Colin, he doesn't just say things beautifully, but he said some beautiful things, didn't he? He said this: you can put good people to good work. And that's a good phrase, isn't it? But what about bad people? People who lack character. Can you put them to good work? No, because who they are is much more important than what they do. Or Jackie, she said, people leave people, not companies. People leave people, not companies. And so if your company has a culture of deficient character, of immorality, then that likely is going to make your company unhealthy, inefficient, not cohesive, and it will likely leave your back door much bigger than your front door. You see, our character doesn't just bless us, it blesses the people that are most important in our life. Think about at home in your marriage and with your kids. Does your trustworthiness, honesty, justice, compassion, kindness play a significant role in those relationships? The same is true in the workplace. You see, who you are is a much bigger deal than what you possess, the skills you have, or even the experience you bring to the table. For those who are in the mode of hiring, if you have a person of good character but less experience, and another candidate of a lot of experience but bad character, you know what choice you're going to make. Because you understand that humans, when they're living according to their nature, are to be moral and people of good character. And when they're not only are they unhappy, but they'll make everyone else unhappy as well. So two practical look in the mirror questions to ask yourself, who am I? What are the virtues that you now possess or have cultivated over the years and through the things that you've done in life? Am I patient? Am I kind? Am I considerate? Am I generous, loving, compassionate, and humble? Or am I cranky, cruel, critical, mean, selfish, and bitter? And if you struggle to have an honest self-assessment, maybe grab a trusted coworker or a spouse, and if you're brave enough, ask them, how would you describe my character? Because sometimes we need other people to tell us the truth about us. Who are you? And the second question, though, is, I think, even more important. Who should I become? You see, acknowledging where we are is the first step to figuring out where we want to be. And if we begin to seriously consider the areas where we're morally weak or broken, and we seek to practice honesty, kindness, gentleness, patience, seeking the good of others, then we will begin to better experience the blessed byproduct of happiness in our home and in our workplace. I mean, look at the signs behind me. I'm not saying anything new, am I? Honor, authenticity, courage, commitment, civility, ethics, and humanity. Now, not only are we moral beings, but we're also relational beings, aren't we? Humans are incredibly relational. Aristotle, once again, famously said, humans are social creatures. Relationships for humans are not a luxury, but an essential factor if we're going to flourish. And this is even more pronounced today. I don't know if you read this, but a few years ago, the Surgeon General of the United States actually declared loneliness to be an epidemic in our nation. He wrote a letter to the nation that said this: loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both the individual and societal health. It is associated, loneliness, with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness. Lacking relationships is harmful, but on the positive side, having meaningful relationships is a powerful resource for happiness. And to make this point, I'd like to share with you a study that came out of Harvard University. They have been conducting and are still conducting the longest longitudinal study ever done in human history. A longitudinal study, unlike a cross-examination study, is like taking a piece of cake and then looking at here's what the layers are. That's like when they throw out a poll and it's quick and it's easy, but it doesn't give you always the best data. A longitudinal study starts at a certain point and carries the experiment on over the course of many years. They're much more rare because they're much more harder to do and they require much more research. They've been involved in a longitudinal study that is now 85 years old. And their question was particularly interesting. They weren't trying to find out what's wrong with people, but they actually asked the other question: what makes a human thrive? And so they took two groups of both Harvard graduates and the poorest of nearby Brooklyn community, and they followed them for 84 years. They're now into the second generation. So they're not studying the people anymore, but the kids of the people. And they wrote this: for 84 years and counting, the Harvard study tracked the same individuals, asking thousands of questions, taking hundreds of measurements to find out what really keeps people healthy and happy. Through all the years of studying these lives, one crucial factor stands out for the consistency and power of its ties to both physical health, mental health, and longevity. Contrary to what many people might think, it's not career achievement or exercise or a healthy diet. Don't get us wrong, these things matter a lot. But one thing continuously demonstrates its broad and enduring importance. One life investment that is supported by similar findings across a wide variety of other studies, it would be this: good relationships keep us healthier and happier, period. You see, if you're like me, my experience says a hearty amen to their findings. Because think about us, whenever we have new technology, what do we use it for? To connect with other people, don't we? Now, there's an unfortunate side effect that happens is that as we have expanding social media and technology, it tends to increase the amount of people we know out there, but it tends to decrease the depth we know about the people who are right in front of us. However, the impulse to use technology to connect, again, shows us the relational nature that we seek. Or think about the worst punishment that a prison can give to an inmate who has, been up to some kind of tomfoolery. Solitary confinement. Isn't it fascinating that even the most hardened prisoners in our society fear what one punishment? Being alone for long periods of time. You see, we're hardwired for community and relationships, and you and I will not be happy unless those relationships are healthy and warm. So, to think about this practically, 3 questions that I'd ask you to consider this afternoon. First, who are the most important people in your life? Who are they? Spouse, children, friend, fellow church member, boss, employees, colleagues. It'd be wise to write down a list of maybe 5 or 6 of the people that you value most in your life. But then once you have found out who these people are, here's your second question. How are they? And not how are they doing, but how is your relationship with those people? Now, you can think about the quality of your relationship with them in 2 ways. How frequently do you enjoy them? And are they energizing or depleting? How frequently or infrequently do you see them? And is the relationship energizing or depleting? So if you use this as a graph, you can almost chart them exactly where they're at. Don't worry, I won't show them where you put them on the graph. So if I were to use this, my wife, Shauna, is right up there for me. She is energizing, and I see her all the time. I live with her. I think about my brother, Drew. He actually is a financial advisor. He owns a branch up in Bend, Oregon. And so Drew is one of the most energizing people that I know in my life. We have an excellent relationship. We can talk for hours, but I don't get to see him as often because he lives in Bend, Oregon. So he's a little bit more on the infrequent side. I have 2 great friends, one a fellow pastor with me, Matt, and then another, a neighbor of mine who are deep, abiding friends. I get to see them more frequently than my brother, but they're energizing. And then I got Jennifer down here. Now, Jennifer is not my mother-in-law. Her name is Charlene, so that's not Jennifer. Jennifer's not a real person, but let's say I have Jennifer, and let's say Jennifer, I see her often. Maybe she's a colleague, maybe she's a partner at work, but the nature of our relationship, although we see each other frequently, is somewhat depleting. Okay? So that's analyzing where or how these relationships are in my life. And then the third question is, where do I want these relationships to be? Because in order to know where they are to be, I first have to know where they are. But then it's good to say, what can I do to invest in these significant relationships in my life so I can bring them into a more enriching, more fulfilling, more fruitful, and enjoyable relationship? So then if you were to do this would be some of the goals that I would have. Jennifer's not a person I can just get rid of, right? But what can I do to invest in the nature of our relationship? Can I be generous? Can I be kind? Can I be curious about Jennifer? Can I seek to what makes her tick and what? So then if I enrich our relationship, then she's going to continually become more and more energizing. And the value we both get from that relationship will probably experience the blessed byproduct of happiness. So I encourage you to chart this graph down. Sit down with your spouse or a colleague or a best friend and think about how essential and important your relationships are. And think about this one principle. We always want to be wise enough to invest in what we treasure the most. Now we think about that with stocks, in business, in the bottom line. But don't miss thinking about that with your relationships. Nobody drifts into healthy relationships. It has to be intentionally sought and cultivated. If you leave a garden just to be, the weeds will choke out the crops. The animals will come in and tear it all up. But if you are attentive to do the work and cultivate and protect your garden, then it will bring far more beauty and joy than otherwise. You and I are not animals, and so basic pleasures are not going to satisfy us. You and I are not bank accounts, and so money won't fill us. You and I are human beings who are relational in nature, and investing in those relationships will enrich us. Now here's the last one. We're also worshipful beings. We're worshipful beings. Now, at this point, red flags are going off for many of you. You're saying, oh, I knew it. Here he goes. Jackie was applauded for her critical thinking skills earlier. You may be, questioning her critical thinking skills by asking the pastor now to come up. But before you're ready to walk away, you know that this is not just something that religious people or pastors have been talking about, but the business world is beginning to catch on when it comes to issues of spirituality, aren't they? We've heard about IQ, intelligent quotient, EQ this morning from Amy, the emotional quotient, but businesses today are starting to talk about more and more SQ, the spiritual quotient. There's one business writer that explained the spiritual quotient this way. Spiritual quotient encompasses a range of qualities of a person such as self-awareness, compassion, empathy, integrity, and a sense of purpose. It focuses on connecting with one's inner self and the broader universe. Integrating spirituality into the workplace can profoundly affect individual well-being and organizational success. He goes on and says that one's spiritual quotient produces qualities of resilience, empathy, compassion, innovation, creativity, well-being, and driving success, and a sense of meaning and purpose. Along with IQ and EQ, businesses are focusing now also on SQ. And this is important because allow me to say something that you may not have thought before. But all of us in here, religious or non-religious, we are all worshipers of something. In fact, David Foster Wallace, who is an awarded novelist who died a few years back in 2005, he's also an atheist. In 2005, he gave a commencement speech at Kenyon College, and he said these words. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason, Wallace says, for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus or Allah, Yahweh, the Wiccan mother goddess, or the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, or some other infrangible set of ethical principles, the benefit of worshiping those things is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. He goes on and says, if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap into the real meaning of life, then you'll never have enough. Never feel that you have enough. If you worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. If you worship power, Wallace says, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need even more power over others to keep that fear at bay. If you worship your intellect, being seen as smart, then you will end up always feeling stupid, a fraud, or always on the verge of being found out, and so on. Again, to quote Colin earlier today, what drives you? What is the one thing on top of all the other things that your entire life is converging toward? And you can say that's the thing that drives you, or you can use even Christian speak and say that that's what you worship. That's your God. Whatever you trust, love, or treasure above everything else is the God that your entire life revolves around. So here's my question. Everyone in here has a God. But is your God qualified for the job? I mean, think about our kids are valuable to us. And so what do? We vet the babysitters. We make sure that the babysitters are qualified for the job. We care about our companies, and so we vet our employees to make sure they're qualified for the job. We vet our doctors because we value our health and we want them to be qualified for our job. If we see that when we have something important to take care of, whoever's taking care of it ought to be qualified. If our lives are important to us, isn't it worth asking, is the God that I worship qualified for the job? Is he or she real and not made up? Is he permanent or is he temporary? Is the God I worship unlimited or limited? Is the God I worship powerful, all-powerful, or limited and weak in some kind of way? And maybe this question, will this God help me in life? And even more, will this God help me in death? You see, if you have found something or someone that meets all of those requirements, then living for that God makes complete sense, doesn't it? If you are rightly related to that being, then it's hard to imagine living an unhappy life. If you had a being who is real, permanent, unlimited, powerful, helping you both in life and in death. Now, my story isn't your story, and I recognize that. I can't make the choice for you of who to worship, but you can't not choose something. If the thing that you're living for, friends, doesn't meet all of those requirements, or you know something else better meets them, might it be time for you to grab your receipt, return your old God, and exchange it for one that can better fulfill that position? Now, at this point, some of you may be thinking, this is not for me. I came for business stuff, not talk about morality, relationships, and especially God. But though these things may not seem important to some of us now, may I share with you an old Latin phrase that both helps me and haunts me at the same time. Memento mori. It means remember death. And it's not as, morbid as you think. But the idea behind the phrase memento mori is that the practice of us remembering one day we will die forces us to think hard, not about the trivial things that often catch our attention, but it makes us think hard about the things that are the most important in my life. Thinking about the eventuality of our death sobers us to use the limited time and energy we have to focus on the things that truly matter. You see, on that day, and I hope for all of us, it's many, many decades into the future, but on that final day, consider what will matter most to you. Is it going to be how much time you spent in the office, the accolades or promotions, the amount of money in the bank, the temporary pleasurable experiences that are well in the past? Or on that final day, will what matters to you be the kind of person that you were, the relationships that you enjoyed, and the God that you did or didn't worship? You see, what will be your regrets on those days? As a pastor, I've sat at the deathbed of a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people regret the kind of person they were, bemoan that they didn't invest more in their relationships. Even as a pastor, I've sat next to people who their entire life were irreligious but became very serious about the questions of God and purpose and meaning in life on those final days. On the other hand, I've never heard anybody have a regret like this: I wish I spent more time in the office. Or, should I have lived it up more? Or, I wish I had a little bit more money in the bank. A simple piece of advice from a friend to a friend. There aren't many good things to say about death, but this is one of them. It forces us to think about what's most important. And instead of pushing these important questions for those final days, can I suggest that you do begin to think about them now? Memento mori. And if you do, and you focus on the most important things of what it means to be a human, maybe you'll begin to find happiness rubbing up against your leg. I'd like to end with just a short story about this man, Horst Schultz. He's a businessman. He's a successful businessman. This little hotel called the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company he founded. And in this book, he records his life and experience. It's a fantastic book for business, but it goes beyond that. One time in the height of his career success, he was diagnosed with an aggressive and deadly form of colon cancer, and his world exploded. Reflecting on his experience, he writes in his book, "That evening, upon my diagnosis, I looked at my dear wife and said, 'This can't be happening.' Soon we were praying together, 'God, please, our children, they're only 9, 5, and 18 months. They won't even know me as they grow up. I won't be able to help or influence them.'" You see, the diagnosis began to radically reorder how he looked at his life. And he said, "My high-flying career in the hotel world faded in importance. All the ambition, the strategic plans, the ego, the money, and the recognition got stripped away. They weren't relevant anymore. When this kind of upheaval erupts in your life, it is easier to let God come and fill the vacuum." And thankfully, after surgeries, care, and prayer, his cancer went into remission, but he found himself a forever changed man at home and at work. He writes, "The foundation of God's truth now lies at the center of my business. Whether I'm interacting with an employee or a customer, an investor, or even a competitor, I am aware that this person is made in the image of God. He's one of the others Jesus had in mind when he gave the golden rule about treating them as I would want to be treated." His relationships in his work radically reordered. And finally, he writes this, "In retrospect, I think I was mostly a Sunday Christian until the onset of my cancer. This was a time when my business achievements lost all importance. They played no more role. They no longer sheltered me from the screaming need for hope, and at this point, it could only be found in Christ. So my decision for Christ and for hope was a deep and permanent one. To tell the truth," and here's the line, "I am today thankful for cancer, as well as grateful to have survived it." How could anybody ever say, "I'm thankful for cancer"? But in his story, it makes sense, doesn't it? What did his cancer cause him to do? It didn't cause him to relinquish something or to get something he didn't have before, but it caused him to reorder the values in his life, to reevaluate the gooses that he was chasing, to reorder the goods that he identified, and to rewire the way that he invested in his character, his relationships, and who he worshiped. And the result was so life-changing for him, so enjoyable, that he was willing to thank God for even the cancer that caused that change. As I close, friends, we all want to be happy. All of us. But don't chase happiness. It'll always get away from you. Instead, may I encourage you this afternoon, as you go back to your businesses and to your homes and to your families, don't chase gooses, but pursue the rightly ordered goods of being a human fully alive. Lean into who you've been created to be, a moral, relational, and worshiping human. And in becoming human, you'll begin to experience not a fleeting acquaintance with happiness, but a lifelong, ever-increasing enjoyment of it.